to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah. Linda, will you take the roll, please?
Anthony Realty.
Here.
Tim Connor.
Here.
Dennis Gagnon.
Here.
David Hardy.
Here.
Peter Lewis.
Here.
Neil Tolman.
Here.
And Neil Sessions.
Here.
Well, welcome to the rescheduled December Planning Board meeting, which used to be in November. The first item on the agenda, we have to approval of minutes. Anybody questions, additions, deletions?
So I have a couple of typos, which I'll let Tara know about later, but there were a couple things on page 5. In the third paragraph, it says, he stated what they're doing is simply pushing the edge of the road for the most part where there might be just rubble or a grass shoulder in order to widen it to provide at least blah, blah, blah. And that needs to be rubble wall, not just rubble. Do you see that, Linda?
It needs to be rubble what?
Wall. It's a rubble wall. It's not rubble in the road, just for clarity. And then in the next paragraph, the second sentence, it says, Mr. Gaynor stated the fire department offered no concern with such and added that bridge is actually constructed with an 8-inch concrete slab, which would be sufficient to support this. And I'd just like clarity on what this is. And I think that's it. Yeah, the other, and then there's one, the others are just typos, and I'll send those to Tara.
Okay. Any comments, Steve? Ron? Okay.
Because
Anybody
it was
else?
Ron's statement.
Neil?
I believe it relates to the design loading that was recommended by the design engineer, which would be the emergency vehicle.
To support this emergency vehicle, that,
Yeah, it goes back, if you follow the next sentence, it talks about the supporting the design loading.
okay.
Yeah, just so
Okay.
we know what this refers to. And that's it.
Anybody else? Any other question? Peter, Dave?
No.
Motion to adopt the minutes from second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. First item, reference a change, proposed local law from the town board regarding Magazino. To amend town code chapter 175 to add the uses of art gallery and museum. The use is permitted in office/commercial/industry mixed use. Steve, comment?
Well, to be quite candid, the genesis of the local law was the Magazino development, which I'm sure everyone remembers coming through. Well, most of us remember coming through. It was approved as a warehouse. It took on sort of the personality of a museum or an art gallery. I'm not, maybe a combination of the two as far as that went. And it resulted in some confusion in the town as to exactly what's allowed for this type of use. So rather than allow the use of warehouse to be, let's say stretched, I won't say distorted, but stretched, the town board felt it would be a good idea to create 2 new categories of uses allowable in the district. Which district do you remember off the top of your head? No, wasn't it OC? It's OC. Yeah, it's OC. And so they've created these 2 categories, one being museum, the other being art gallery. The main difference between the 2 is that in an art gallery you can sell the objects d'art that you display. Museum would be solely for more scholarly and in-house type of uses. Both allow limited congregations for activities related to the use of museum or art gallery, as the case may be. And that's what it does. It adds those two uses to the OC district. I suppose if Magazzino was so inclined, they could perhaps, come in and clean up their use. They're not required to do that, obviously, because they have approval as it is. But if other such uses were to come into the OC, they would be processed under that type of zoning classification. And that's what the local law does. The town board wants to know if the planning board has any comments, thoughts, concerns about that proposed local law. And once you debate it, we'll send a letter, as we always do with these things, with the report of the planning board to the town board.
Okay, planning board.
So I have a question. Where does it, in this article, talk about limited gatherings?
It's in the definitions part.
I'm sorry, I don't.
Definitions in the zoning code?
No, in the local law.
In the law.
No, I don't see anything though on your, here that says anything about limited.
Pass it over, I'll find it for you. It says, I'll just use art galleries, the language is the same for museums. Art galleries may be used to host gatherings for purposes related to the works of art on display, whether promotional, scholastic, or as a fundraiser.
How does that, so it's not limited in terms of number, it's just limited in terms of function?
Well, the number would be based upon the permitted occupancy of the building that's on it and the parking that's available on the site. But that aside, there's no particular limitation in the law.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, if that's a concern, by all means, you should point that out to the town board.
Well, we went around and around initially when we were discussing the amount of parking available.
Well,
But that was when people were coming on based on reservations they had made, or coming from the train station by bus and so forth.
we understand that these uses are subject to site plan approval, and when they come in for site plan approval, one of the issues this board will deal with is what's the occupancy that you propose, how much parking will there be, that type of thing. And depending on where it's located, I think it's fair to inquire, what's the nature, if any, of the activities which you host or may host, and you can impose reasonable conditions on that. Anything from hours of operation to decibels to, traffic control measures.
And there would be guidelines for, like, let's say it's a sculpture museum, like what the occupancy could be based on the fact that there are things, it's not like a big open space like this, that there would be things on the floors. There would be guidelines for that. Somewhere would our building inspector find something in the code?
What is it you're trying to get at with guidelines?
Well, so occupancy, like how do you measure occupancy?
Occupancy is by square footage, Ron?
The square footage, I'm uncertain of the specifics of the New York State Building Code. I hear your question. I think it's something that the building inspector could easily respond to. But you're questioning whether it's different from just general occupancy versus something where there's artwork present that you're walking around.
No, it would be the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Neil.
So, I just a comment on this, and I've made this before when we've talked about this at different times, and the multiple times this applicant came back for increases of usage. I like the Old Expanos and what they've been doing. They're good people, and they've done good work for this community. And as we know, they tried 2 times to create a facility like this. The first was on Avery Road, and they withdrew it after some significant opposition that occurred in front of us. So I admire what they've done in taking a dilapidated, and Mr. Fadden hopefully is not offended by me using that term of his previous usage for cybercrime, but a building that was not a beautiful building to turn into something reasonable and attractive to the region, and I appreciate that. However, let's not lose sight of the fact that the reason why they named it Magazzino, does anyone recall what Magazzino means in Italian? Warehouse. Thank you. It was defined as a warehouse. They came to us as a warehouse, and slowly we have now emerged, actually I wouldn't say slowly, to something that is a much more dramatic. It's our little version of Dia Beacon here in Philipstown, here in Putnam County, not Dutchess. And so I worry about the topic of intent. We've seen this before in front of this board. We've seen it with the house in the corner, the southwest corner of 403 and 9, where they purported to say it's being used for a mother-in-law house and was flipped instantly after. We hear different things, and I think the issue of intent matters a great deal. What do I mean by this, practically speaking? I would suggest that somehow we put into the law some sort of moratorium. If a usage is defined and approved, that usage has to last for some period of time, because the notion of coming to us for one usage to get approval, and I'm not suggesting this is their intent, but the perception could be they came to us for a lesser usage, a warehouse, which is very different than a museum with hours and the level of traffic and the intensity on Route 9 and the area. I would like to ensure that maybe we actually someone has to stand behind the intention that they purport to give us in front of this board. So a notion could be, after you receive an approval, that is the approval, and you can come back for an expansion of that approval for some period of time. Call it 3 years, call it for some period of time. I'm not suggesting I think that's a great idea, but I'm trying to get at the issue, which is someone comes to us for a lesser usage, and then actually that is not their intention, and that concerns me.
How does that stand us, Steve, with what the town board has given to us? I mean, we could put this in our concerns, the letter back to the town board.
Well, I have no problem with that, and I think certainly Neil's touched on a subject which, a lot of planners wrestle with in drafting codes. I do not think, however, that it's the type of provision that the town board, I can't speak for them, of course, it's just my opinion, would be inclined to graft onto this particular local law.
Right.
But I think mentioning it as a concern is the type of thing that would, put it in their minds the next time we deal with a zoning update or a change in law, and they could certainly address it in that context. I don't think you put it on this law just
that's
permitting
my
2
concern
additional
with,
types of uses in the OC.
Because I know that was part of the original discussion, the first round we had, when we got away from the a proposal at Avery Road, when they first latched onto this property on 9. That was an intensive discussion we had, so.
Well, we can certainly mention it in the report letter if that's the board's pleasure.
Neil? Anyone?
I'm raising it because I would like it mentioned, because again, I like the intent that our supervisor has, but I do associate myself with Kim's comments that she made recently at the town board about this, because it is a legitimate concern for us and our responsibilities to the community.
Okay, anyone else? Peter? Well, if there's no one else, then I guess we direct.
Neil's concern is the only one we're going to mention in the letter. Other than that, you're okay with the change? Is that what we should?
So, I think it sounds like a good, for a generic law, we're good, regardless of, Magazzino, like Magazzino aside. Having a designation for art gallery museum in the office commercial space where we might have some big buildings that could lend themselves to, that purpose, that sounds great to me, right? I think expanding definitions so that it's clear what can go in what zone is a great idea. As far as the Magazzino piece goes, I was at the town board meeting the other night, and I did not speak for the planning board, but I just spoke for myself to say, to say pretty much what Neil said, which is, that when people come before us, and they represent, there are certain criteria that we have to go through to approve something, and especially, that we talked about that extensively for this particular project, parking, how many people, stuff like that. So, in terms of comments on changing the use for Magazzino, I think that's sort of separate from comments on adding these 2 pieces to this local law.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll prepare a response letter to the town board. I'll circulate it. If anyone has any comments, get them back to me, and I'll incorporate Neil's and Tim's comments. And if anyone has anything else they'd like to add, just let me know, and we'll go from there.
Okay, I assume we need a motion to direct you to do that?
Well, yeah, I think broad terms,
Yeah.
draft a letter to that effect.
Okay,
Would be the way to.
Neil?
Can I ask you to think about one other thing, that same sentence, the second sentence? Art galleries may be used to host gatherings for purposes related to the works of art on display, whether promotional, scholastic, or as a fundraiser. So does that "or" open it up to something not related to art or art functions? Does that open this up to something being more of a general event space?
Well, I think the intent is to keep it to fundraisers that are related to artistic endeavors, but it could be read broadly as a political fundraiser, for example, or
Right, because
something
if you
like
read
that.
it- If you read it, art galleries, maybe.
But I don't think that's the intent.
I know, but I can also see how someone might read it the other way and say, well, it's just a fundraiser.
So you'd like to see language at the end of that
Let's
fundraiser.
think about
related
it,
to-
because if you want, it may be used to host gatherings, let's just say, may be used to host gatherings, so on, or as a fundraiser. So I'm asking you to consider whether we might be better to have something in there that says something, fundraisers related to whatever, artistic enterprise or.
Absolutely.
Okay. Somebody introduce a motion to that?
So moved.
Second?
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. This one, Peck-Eyler, and we received a letter. Steve, are you aware of this letter?
No, it's first I'm seeing.
Yeah, I know, we just got it tonight.
Oh, all right.
I mean, the public hearing has been held and closed. How do we deal with this?
It's up to you.
Well, I think, I don't know what he wants to do, and I don't think we're going to back up on this. We have resolutions already to go from Ron. Approval resolution. So anybody have any questions on this? Nobody's really had time to read this letter from Mr. Florence. Any comments from anybody? Talking about the amount of time he had in the past and public comments and so forth.
I mean, if you'd like me to make a comment.
Well, no, anybody. I mean, otherwise, let's just move on. Take note that we received the letter.
You want me to say something? I mean-
No,
Make a comment.
if you want. Have a comment.
I mean, we read the letter
Yeah.
tonight. I mean, Mr. Florence had 9 minutes, not 4, that evening of what I think was a good 2.5-hour planning board meeting, of which we had 20-some-odd residents of Lake Celeste speak, who all mentioned often the road situation. And I believe after we closed the hearing, after ample opportunity to speak, I myself made a comment at our last planning board meeting where I stated that I actually urged the community to figure out how to make that road more trafficable, more safe. The intent of this letter is to suggest the community did not have a chance to express their views about the road and about their views about Miss Eyler and her rights based on some mix of history and apocryphal recollections. And I think the public was well heard, in my opinion.
Okay. All right, Ron has prepared a resolution approval. Ron, any minimal comment, whatever you want to say?
Yeah, you've also been provided tonight with a draft seeker declaration as well, which should be considered before you take action on the resolution. Resolution identifies all standard conditions of the board that relate to site plan approvals, and it also identifies the specific technical recommendations by the fire department in terms of enhancements to the roadway and the bridge on the private road. So they're both for your consideration tonight.
Okay, we have a negative declaration prepared by Ron. Anybody want to move on that? Anyone?
I had one quick question. I think
Okay.
Ron, in one of your emails, you stated that there was a material amount of back and forth on crafting this. Is that correct?
On both the negative seeker declaration and this resolution, there's been close coordination between the town attorney's office and my office.
Okay, thank you.
There isn't always close coordination.
Right. This has
Well, I
been,
was saying, so this required some particular, so items like letter E, the granting of access, et cetera, neighborhood, neighborhood character, was that part of this
Talking about the secret resolution?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the negative declaration, page 2 of it, letter E. So just tied to the notion that the road has some material narrowness, and is that suggesting that nothing could be changed about the road? I'm trying to understand the interpretation of E.
One of the considerations which the board considers every time that it undertakes secret review is whether the proposed action will materially change the character of the neighborhood. So if you were going from a rural dirt road to a paved 2-lane road, you might very well say, now, wait a minute, that gives me pause, we need to investigate that further. But here you have some engineering upgrades to an existing private roadway. It's not going to change, at least so these findings say, the character of the neighborhood, and that's the meaning of subsection E.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions on this before we vote? Motion to adopt a negative declaration under seeker? Anyone? Second?
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Ron has also prepared a resolution approval for the site plan. Any questions on that? Questions for Ron? Basic comment, Ron, on this?
No, nothing further from me. As I said, it incorporates all standard conditions as well as the unique special conditions to address the roadway condition.
Motion to adopt the Peck-Eyler access approval? Anyone?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Next, SEJE Realty. All right. This has had a number of changes.
Did you point out that the agendas and the sign sheet for the public hearing are here?
Oh, okay.
Put them in the back.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone's wondering what's going on here, need a scorecard, agendas, the agendas and the sign-in sheet, if you want to speak, in the back usually. Don't worry about
I'm
it.
putting it back there, but you wouldn't, how would you know that?
No, I should have told you.
Yeah.
It's all right, don't worry about it.
Don't worry.
Okay, Glenn?
Yes, you'll remember that we came back whenever we previously had a planning board meeting. and
October, Glenn.
And with some changes in the plan, and when that was discussed with Ron, he recommended that we make an application for amended site plan, which we did, and it raised some issues of concern with the board, particularly the potential construction of a fence to screen the view from Route 9 that was within 100 feet of the of Ansville Creek. What wasn't discussed so much, but there was a relocated dumpster location that was within 100 feet of Ansville Creek, and those were I think, the major changes of the plan. We spoke with my client about it, and we discussed how to proceed, whether to get a wetlands permit, construct the fence, whether we could find a suitable material for the fence, because you'll remember that was part of the discussion, and the real proximity and the difficulty of building a new fence in that particular location because it's right on the precipice of the brook. So what he asked us to do was he will accept or withdraw the additional storage that he was seeking that caused the need for the fence. The relocated dumpster area, which was within 100 feet, we moved back to where, well, actually, it says on the plan where it was. It's actually even a little further back and further hidden. So the only change at this point between the plan that you approved a couple of months ago, several months ago now, and the plan that you see before us, which reflects the discussion I had with my client, was the addition of some storage on the ground again, with a limited height against that retaining wall. And I think you'll remember that this area is not visible from the from the road, from Route 9. It's not visible from the Highland Turnpike. If you go out there today, if you had a chance, you'll see that he has densified the evergreen screening and evergreen planting along Highland Road, so it's even less visible now than it was before. And so we're basically asking for approval of putting this on the ground storage with a limited height against the wall. And you'll recall that's where those trailers that we removed had been set. And other than that, the plan remains unchanged from the original approval.
Okay. Ron, comment?
Again, Glenn has identified the modifications that are being proposed based on the board's comments from the sidewalk. Tara had previously done research and confirmed that you had discussed the need for a public hearing at the October meeting, and there was no action to conduct a public hearing. So you're at a point where you might wish to authorize the development of resolutions to grant approval to the project for your next meeting.
So what is happening here is that what we saw on the site visit is actually being cut back from what was proposed while we were at the site.
Right. The storage, the high storage that was proposed adjacent to and north of the building in the rear,
Yeah.
where they actually have some brackets on the wall where they were proposing steel storage, that is being eliminated from the proposal. And that was the primary concern of the board with respect to concern of visibility from the corridor.
Okay.
The low storage on the higher ground to the north of the building was determined not to have any visibility from Route
Right.
9, and was not a concern of the board.
Because it's higher.
Right, it's the
There's two of the concrete walls.
Yeah, yeah.
On each side of the parking area or the yard area up here. So somebody going by from Route 9 has to look over the wall, and by the time that sight line goes over this storage, it's not visible. And from here, they're looking, the purposely kept the height of the storage below the other retaining wall, so again, people passing on the other side are looking over.
Okay, we did take a vote, well, we called for a vote last time. We got no vote on the public hearing. We've done the site visit. We no longer need to address this to the Conservation Board, is that correct now?
That's correct, that's right.
So then we can ask you to prepare seeker declaration?
Yeah, and an approval resolution if you
Yeah.
so wish.
Okay, let's take that, can we put them together? Make a motion to direct Ron to approve us, to create a seeker declaration. Anyone? Second?
I'll second that.
All in favor? Aye. And the same for resolution of approval? Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We have 3 public hearings to go to. First one is, Taylor, Connolly. And
And
Lowry.
Lowry.
3, I said 3. Did I?
I heard three, but
Whoa, okay, folks. The snow must be getting,
acoustics in your building are screwed up, I think.
snow must be getting heavy outside. The first one is Taylor, and correct me the pronunciation, Fertasi? Okay. Glenn,
It's a public hearing.
public hearing. Do we have
Read the notice.
the notice? Oh, yeah. Oh, here, I got it here. Let me start. I'll start it. We'll hold the Philipstown Planning Board will hold a public hearing on Thursday. Well, now we rescheduled it for December 13th. The applicant is seeking site plan approval for construction of 4,020 square foot, 3-bedroom, 3.5 bath, 1-story residential structure with a 900 square foot detached garage, private on-site well and sanitary disposal. Property consists of approximately 17 acres and is situated in RC zoning district. Property lies along a roadway identified in town's scenic protection overlay and lies across from lands identified in town's open space conservation overlay district. And essentially, that's it. Sorry. You can have the next one. You can have the next one.
Board has seen this before. This is a 17-acre site. It's basically a flag lot, the entirety of which is subject to a conservation easement. As we told you in our initial meeting, the conservation easement is being crafted a little bit differently with a slight change in the building envelope that's available. Essentially, the building envelope was a little smaller. That building envelope is going to be increased in terms of square footage, but the height of the building is being decreased in order to minimize the view of any proposed building from the parkland to the east. There's an existing driveway that was built a number of years ago. That goes up to the building envelope area. As the public notice said, there's a 4,000 square foot building being proposed within that building envelope. And there's a couple of questions that have to do with, Ron sent me a memo that he gave you. We are still pursuing either an interpretation or a variance with regard to the grade of the driveway. We had that discussion last month. Your memo that you finished today didn't address it exactly that way, but we're still pursuing that. We're of the opinion that the disturbance would be, if we don't get the interpretation that we want, that we can use that driveway because it was constructed under this existing law at the time. We are seeking a variance to let us have the additional grade on the driveway. You'll remember you all drove up it. Actually,
as I recall, 2 people walked it.
Yes, yes. One old guy and one young guy.
Well, younger.
So, and we feel quite strongly that the additional work to get down to that 14% grade is going to cause significant changes in the appearance of the ground, and it's going to be a lot of unnecessary scarring that we're trying to avoid. We've completed the overall picture, showed you the slopes. And if we take a close-up view of the building, it's a 3-legged building as you drive up from the south in the existing driveway into a parking court and with availability for a garage. There's about 3/4 of an acre of disturbance I'm sorry, that's not correct. There's probably a little bit more than that. There's about 3/4 of an acre of changed characteristics because of the building, a little bit more in terms of the disturbance because of the construction of the septic area. Septic area fill is well in place. The application has been made to the Health Department, and that's pending right now. We couldn't make the November meeting of the zoning board, but we're going into the January meeting. I believe they're not meeting in December. It's on a 17-acre site, as I said. This is one of two, for those of you who are not as old as I am, the vast majority of the land surrounding this is state park. The vast majority of the property was donated by the Osborne family. Osborne family made a conscious decision that they would keep out enough for 3 lots, which they did and which they subdivided. One of those lots was improved with Earl Osborne's house, and that house has since been rebuilt, and Rockmore owns that. Of those 3 lots, the Osborne family donated another lot to the state and left this lot for sale. This is really, that branch of the Osborne family, I think it's several hundred, if not 1,000 acres that they donated. They kept the 2 pieces, and title has passed to other people, and they now plan to improve the property with this house. They've been working with the land trust to modify the agreement to both of their benefits. They'll have a slightly larger footprint of a house, or a larger footprint of the house, I will say, but the land trust will have the building will have a lower profile and therefore be less visible from areas that can see this part of the property from within the park. If I can answer any question, I'd be happy to try.
One question, Ron's third paragraph here about the board previously performed a site inspection, and we refer to the local fire department and so on and so forth. The Conservation Board letter of August 19th advised that any improvements are proposed, permitting from their board will be necessary. So what you've just talked about is going to preclude going to the Conservation Board for?
I don't remember seeing that. And why did they tell you why it would require that?
Well, if there were apparently...
Right, there's a question over the existence of the floodplain along the stream corridor that's east of the property, right at the entrance,
That floodplain and
and the wetlands in that area.
Let me just digress for a second. I didn't become aware, to be perfectly frank, I didn't make the original application, and I wasn't aware that there was a deficiency in a deficiency in the EAF. I redid the EAF, and that's one of that was in the envelope that I handed to Ron before. The proximity to the wetlands is parallel to the road that comes straight in. The wetlands is across. If you drive in the road, you come in fairly straight and perpendicular from Phillips Brook Road or South Highland Road, and to your right, about 50 feet away, there's a footpath or there's an access path into the state park. That's in a state park. That's an easement. That I'll tell you a little bit more about it, that easement. Then across there and right near the property line, and maybe mostly off the property, there's part of a 50, I think it's a 58-acre wetland. But I don't envision any action on that driveway until we start turn to the left and then move away from the wetlands. So I don't see why there would be a wetland permit required.
No, it's understandable that there's a question. The Conservation Board, when they received the referral from this planning board, they merely wish to meet with you in the field.
Well, we'd be happy to do that.
And resolve those issues to determine if in fact permitting would be necessary or not. So that remains an open issue until we hear back from the Conservation Board or their inspector.
Okay.
Anyone else? Kim?
So I have one question, which is, the way this house is drawn, it shows that there's a connection between the garage and the house. Is that correct, or is that just?
It's not an enclosed, it's a patio connection, or it's a walkway.
Sorry, Cecilia.
It's
So
a walkway. It's not an indoor connection.
It's not a deck, it's not a breezeway, it's not
Not a
anything like
breezeway,
that?
it's right here.
All right.
Well, it's a deck, yes. I mean, it's a,
So the garage doesn't get added to the total square footage for the house?
the application, it's a 4,000 square foot house plus a little bit, and then it's an 800-foot garage, and that's what the application says.
Right, but I just want to make sure that they're not, that the garage, because people come to us sometimes, where they've added a garage, and then they've connected it to the house in such a way that it pushes their threshold again. So I just
It's a brand-new
wanted
house.
to find out what
I can't, I'm sure that won't happen within the next 3 years.
Okay.
Anyone else? Neil?
Just looking at the graphic on the back, what is the maximum slope of the driveway? Because the back one makes it look like it's... As I'm looking at this graphic, this looks much steeper than the 14%.
This is a 20% slope.
Understood.
It's closer to 20. You can see it's roughly
Okay.
parallel.
And the land development, whatever chapter that is, 110 or something, is 14%, right?
Neil?
With regard to the open development area, that's correct. This is not an open development area.
So what's our limit on this?
Once driveway slopes max.
That's 14%.
14%, that's in the zoning law,
That's what I'm saying. So you're asking for a 20%, right?
right. And that-
So I guess my question, I totally hear the point about disturbance, and that's always, it's good to minimize disturbance, but there is a point where steepness becomes a challenge, and I don't know what that is. Is it 20? Is it 22? Is it 24? Like, I don't know how vertical one then feels like it's safe for not just whatever cars these guys, and I remember you guys have a very modest car. You have like a Sentra or something like that. I don't remember what it was, but if you start driving a big car and very heavy and
Or a fire truck.
and I'm not even there at the fire truck. I'm just saying, like, future generations, bigger cars, steeper. When does it become too much? And I don't know if 20 is okay. I don't know if 22. I just don't know where that is. But when I recall the Santucci's, it was my first project on this plan where we had a lot of discussion about balancing steepness with disturbance. And I think we approved a 16%. Do I recall
It was
that?
over 14, yeah.
What's that?
It was over 14.
It was over 14, but I don't think it was nearing 20.
No,
And I'm just raising the question about where's that limit? Where does it become a little bit unsafe?
And also, in addition to that, stormwater, that
Runoff.
one of the things we do have to consider, given the kinds of storms we have now, is that, the steeper it is, the more of the mountain it'll carry with it.
Who is
So-
expert enough to give us a viewpoint about where that number is, where it becomes unsafe?
Let's just look at the history of the board. Typically, when these applications come before you, you always try to apply current standards. So you seek to have applicants not exceed the 14% threshold. You've permitted it in the past, but only upon a finding that's presented by the applicant to provide that balance to the board, to understand the difference that occurs from trying to achieve the 14% standard versus some higher grade in order to minimize disturbance. That's not yet been provided. The applicants previously discussed the issue that this driveway should be grandfathered, since the driveway's been in place for an extended period. I think the board was willing to consider that, but the request of the applicant was to provide information for the review by the town attorney to understand whether grandfathering was an appropriate concept for the driveway, and that has not yet been provided.
My question is less about legality and more about safety. I'm just raising the question. Maybe, Ron, you can't answer that, but
Engineering.
Well, no, it first starts with understanding the extended disturbance.
let's just
So-
say, I'm making the argument, let's assume, for the hypothetical, that there was no way of building anything else. No matter how much you disturb, you're still at 20%. That's a hypothetical.
Right.
I'm trying to get a viewpoint about whether that's a reasonable and safe steepness for a driveway. I'm just asking that question.
Right, I would first expect the applicant to identify extended disturbance for different grades higher than 14. You've permitted grades higher than 14. I believe you've permitted grades as high as 17%. But it's a matter of first understanding the reasonableness for changing grades from what exists to see if there's some reasonable alternatives to pursue. So that has to come from the applicant.
If I could just interject on that. I agree with everything you said, Ron. The only thing I'd add to it, just to kind of clarify, it's not just percent of grade, it's the distance the percent of grade goes. It may be acceptable to have a 20% grade if it's over a short distance and you kind of level
had
out
this
after that.
discussion
But if
before.
it's 20% all the way up, you may have a problem. So it's kind of fact-specific as far as that sort of thing goes. I don't know that you need to bring in a traffic engineer, but the burden's on the applicant to satisfy you that that's safe, and they'll have to submit things like, hey, we went to the fire company, and the fire company says it's
Right.
okay, you know? or-
I think all the referrals were made.
Right, the referrals
Yeah.
were made,
fire
there's been no
company-
comment from the fire company, but we haven't been that specific. If there's additional
Yeah,
data
right.
that can be provided by the applicant, you'd want them to review that as well.
If I can get back to the original discussion, I went away with the understanding that we should, with regard to the law of this, we should go to the ZBA for an interpretation or a variance, as opposed to providing it directly to Mr. Gaba.
Yeah, my position on this is that since you're building a new structure using the driveway for more than just access to the lot, you're using it for access to new construction, that you don't fall underneath, or at least I don't see a way. I appreciate your position that having to decrease the grade is going to cause more damage than leaving it as it is, and you may very well be right, but I can't see a way legally to get there. So it might be easier for you to go to the ZBA and get a variance than for us to go back and forth and try to hash it out and maybe not reach a conclusion one way or the other.
We're presenting a dual application that seeks first an interpretation, and that fails to go our way, we'll do a variance
Absolutely, you can do that to the ZBA.
to the ZBA.
Right.
And I fully expect to, to be quizzed in that regard, in regard to all of this at the ZBA.
Okay, now, the resolution seeker is going to hang on there getting the variance first? Or can we do the seeker and do a resolution contingent upon granting of a variance?
You could do it that way, sure.
And we've done it before that way.
Yeah.
How's the board feel? Anyone? Comment?
You have to invite the public. You haven't had public comment yet.
Yeah, okay, but I'm just asking the board's comment before we even get there.
Okay.
The only thing I would just like to hear what the fire company has to say.
Okay.
So whether they need more input or they just need to drive up it, I don't know. That's their prerogative, but I'd love to hear their thoughts. Because
Okay.
again, I'm empathetic to the applicant's situation. They bought a property, it's got a driveway, but I want it to be safe for them and future generations.
Okay.
One other just procedural thing, and I'm not sure what happened, but when I was going through the EAF, and as I said, I didn't submit the original one, but there wasn't mention that we need a 239 referral. I don't know if that was included in your package of referrals.
I'll have to confirm with the board.
Pardon me?
I'll have to confirm that. I'll have to go through the files.
Okay, but
See if that was done.
we're right next to a state park. That's the,
Anything else, Glenn?
no.
The board?
Ron, could we go over the timeline real quick again? The theory behind grandfathering?
Well, when the driveway is built, we got a permit and built the driveway, and I'm not sure how it was closed out. I have to check that. This driveway was within the regulations, and frankly, because there was no maximum grade of a driveway at the time.
Well, there might not have been any local,
Just hold a public hearing.
there might not have been any local codes, but what would the ruling law have been at the time? Would it have been a state code?
I'm not familiar. I don't know of any, and I know, to be honest, I don't know of any other past the town level.
What was
There may have
my-
been.
well,
If there was anywhere.
My question is, what was standard practice at the time? If it hadn't been recognized by the local municipality, what was being enforced?
There was,
I
to
mean,
be
nothing-
perfectly honest, there was nothing being enforced with regard to grades. If you go around town and see some of the driveways that were built in the 70s and 80s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s,
Well, we're not going back
and
that
90,
far.
80s and 90s then, you'll see some pretty steep driveways to private roads. The only grades that were regulated beyond, were public roads, road, highway, and open development area streets that service multiple lots.
I'd be interested to see what the state law was at the time. And again, I mean, we're familiar with building something on spec, which is short for speculation. And so they built something and they didn't finish the project. So I mean.
I honestly
you
don't
put
think
all
that.
kinds of things out. When you make a commitment like that, as speculating, well, one of the things you're leaving out there is that the codes can change or can get more restrictive.
Well, certainly that can happen on some things, and that's why we're making asking for the interpretation, and alternately a variance. I don't think that was ever done with a spec. I've dealt with everybody from the Osbornes to the current owners, and everyone went in there with the intention of building a home, and for one reason or another, things changed. Okay, so it wasn't, that driveway wasn't put in, I'm certain that that driveway was not put in order to let the brokers show how beautiful the property is.
Okay, anything else from the board? I'll open it up to the public. Correct.
Can we see a we didn't get a copy of the permit, did we? I don't remember seeing a.
Yes, that was
We did?
submitted to you.
Yeah.
But I'll give you another one. It
Okay.
was submitted.
Okay, comment from the public, anyone? The applicants here? Sir, state your name, please, Stan. Would you, any comments?
Come up, you need to speak in the mic.
You don't have to. It's not required.
No, you don't have to. I mean, if,
I'm the property owner.
Yeah.
My wife and I own the property. We're happy to answer any questions, but I don't have any public comment on the project,
Okay.
no.
all right. Anyone else? Ma'am, state your name, please.
Michelle Lockmore. I just wanted to know if I could.
Michelle,
get a
come
copy-
up, come up to the
mic,
microphone.
sorry.
Hi, Michelle Lockmore. I just wanted to know if I could get a copy of what's going on here, just to view and show my husband. Thank you.
Excuse my doodles.
Anyone else? Any final comments?
No comments from the public?
Okay.
Well, it's up to the board, of course, but two things jump out. First off, haven't heard from the fire company. My notes show we did not send this to county planning. I'd suggest that the best thing to do would be to hold this over to the next meeting to let those two things be accomplished.
Okay.
The other thing is, since this is site plan, I believe, site plan? So you don't really need a referral from the planning board to go to the zoning board. If you'd like one, though, I'm sure the board will give you one. I don't know if you want to do that now, or you want to do it later, or how you want to handle that.
Certainly an easier path. You know, if we could get a brief note referring it to the zoning board, that would be appreciated.
So don't close, I mean, it's up to you.
No, we're not gonna close.
Don't close the public hearing.
Taking
and
your
give them a
advice.
referral to the zoning board. I'll draft up a letter, I'll circulate it like the other one, make sure everybody's satisfied with the
Okay,
referral.
motion to direct this to the zoning board. I think Steve send a note to the zoning board.
Make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've got a motion to hold the public hearing open.
Oh, we need a motion to do that.
Well, look, you could just declare.
All right.
But that's a little imperial, why don't you?
Okay.
I'll move that we hold it open to
Second?
January.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. You got the public notice for the second one? Oh, hurry up. Or if you need this here. So much for meetings moving.
New York. We'll hold a public hearing on Thursday. Okay.
December 13th.
Thursday,
Oh, you got the revised one.
oh, December
13th.
13th, 2018, starting at 7:30 PM at the old VFW Hall, 35 Kemble Avenue in Cold Spring, New York, to consider the following application. Chris, Kristen Conley, Route 403, Garrison. The applicant is seeking site plan approval for the construction of a two-story, four-bedroom residential structure with an attached garage. A Putnam County Department of Health permit for the SSTS proposed to serve the residents has already been issued. The current vacant 1.5-acre property is situated on a RR zoning district in the town of Philipstown. Tax map number 82.7-1-2. The property lies along a roadway identified on the town's scenic protection overlay mapping. Much of the site is also encumbered by town-regulated steep slopes, minus 20%. Greater than 20%, and lies in the vicinity of the town-designated scenic ridgeline. A town-regulated wetland also exists across Route 403 for the project site. At said hearing, all persons will have the right to be heard. Copies of the application, plat map, and other related materials have been seen in the office of the Planning Board at Philipstown Town Hall.
Thank you. Oh, you don't have to do the next one. Struggled. Glenn?
Public notice pretty much told it all. This is a 1.5-acre parcel. It's en route 403, a few hundred feet north of the intersection of Route 9. So you have the Appalachian Market, you have Dr. Gergel's office, that crossroad that goes over to Route 9, and then this property. You were out there. There were a couple of your comments were for us to look at the two major comments were, one, to look at the possibility of swinging the driveway to the south, and second, your question whether or not this small area was a wetland or not. And in fact, Max went out there, and Mr. Garfinkel has determined that it's hydrologically connected to a much larger wetland area to the south. Recognizing the, so that complicated our situation with regard to the septic and with regard to bringing the driveway around to the other way, to the south. So we have not changed the driveway, although we have provided some of the plantings that the Conservation Board has asked that we do. We're not finished with that. We expect we're going to get some input from Mr. Garfinkel about that. The seriously big concession that we were told that he would consider would be letting us build within the buffer area of the wetland within the 100 feet. And so you see the changes you see on this plan from the last time were some other landscape and a barrier designed to minimize the migration of any of the infiltrating septic effluent into the wetlands. So that application has been made to the Conservation Board, and it will be at their next meeting, I expect. And then and I'm not certain if it went into the Health Department or not, to tell you the truth. But it did? It did. Okay. So as it from the physical point of view, what you envisioned or what you saw with the other plan in your hand versus what you would see if you went out there with this new plan in your hand. It hasn't changed very much at all, with those two exceptions. The planting, which we intend to densify, and the barrier that we intend to construct. We are in the scenic protection area, and was Mr. Garfinkel did raise a question that he raised in his letter to you. With that, I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Okay, Ron, comment?
Yeah, the applicant's been provided with the board sidewalk comments from the earlier field visit. I have a few questions based on what we've just heard tonight. The conservation inspector has now identified that is a town-regulated wetlands along the frontage?
Yes.
And are the plans being revised to illustrate that boundary and the 100-foot buffer?
The flags are located, and yes, it's shown here. And there's the buffer shown here.
So the 100-foot buffer encompasses just the septic system? Does it incorporate?
Part of the house.
It includes the house as well,
And
portions of the
and
house?
The very first part of the driveway.
The plans that are going to the Department of Health, do they likewise identify the now identified wetlands on the frontage?
I'm sure they do. Like I say, I haven't personally seen them, but I'm sure they do. I mean, we discussed that in the office, and we knew that that's another hurdle that we have to get over.
Okay. I guess it's a matter for the applicant to formally respond to the comments raised by the board and then await the Department of Health's review comments on the issue of its proximity to the wetland.
Okay. Board, questions?
Yeah, I have a question. So, Ron, from your memo, it says, while access driveways are permitted within steep slopes, town-regulated steep slopes, the house construction does not appear to be exempt. So, I guess what I'm asking is, like, it was my understanding that you could traverse steep slopes for driveways.
That's correct. That exemption is provided for in the code.
Right. But we're not necessarily supposed to be building houses in steep slopes.
Right.
And so what rationale would we have for doing that here?
Again, the reason the comment was raised is that I did not believe it was appropriate. I think we were hopeful of obtaining comments from the town attorney in terms of the interpretation of that regulation. That's what this is.
Steve?
Well, we are hopeful of obtaining them. It's not going to come at this meeting.
Okay,
But we can certainly have it for the January meeting, and we'll address that issue.
okay.
And you'll notice that the house is respectful of the setbacks and so that's our issue. We have zoning the back of the house is right on the setback line. The front of the house, I think, is right on the setback line too, but so.
Is it possible to push the house to the north to remove it from the wetlands boundary?
Could look at that.
And
It's been-
deal with the issue of steep slopes?
I don't think we can avoid the issue of steep slopes.
So it just seems to me like this is a very small piece with a lot of compromises, you know. And, you know, I don't know how often we locate septic systems in wetlands, but I would hope we don't do that very often.
Well, we're not doing that.
But you said that's.
Well, there's a distinction
Within the
between
buffer.
wetlands and wetlands buffer.
How often do we put a septic system in the buffer?
That happens actually quite frequently, not by your board, but replacement systems are put in there all the time.
Well, replacement systems, though, are by nature,
Pre-existing.
by definition, they're grandfathered, they're pre-existing.
Well,
you know?
There's an extenuating circumstance that often requires that, and we believe we have an extenuating circumstance on this piece of property.
Yeah, I know, I understand that once it's there and it goes bad, it has to be
Yeah,
repaired.
right.
Okay.
It's not there.
Right.
In this case,
in
no,
this case.
no.
Well, I think Glenn's point is that although
Yeah.
certainly it's not ideal, it isn't necessarily detrimental to the wetlands to put it in the buffer.
Right.
Depending on how it's designed and installed.
Right.
I don't think there's a hard and fast rule you can never do it. The question is whether it's appropriate
Right.
to do it in this instance.
As we were told, the wetlands law, when it was being discussed, is a permitting law. It's a thou must get permission. It's not a thou shalt not law.
Okay, right, right.
I guess I have one other question, which is I noticed that a for sale sign went up on this property since we did our site visit.
Really?
I think that there's a contract out there, and I think that there's a
So I guess I'm just wondering.
term
if
of the
this is
contract
a
that's getting
spec.
close.
Uh-huh. I mean, it doesn't, it's probably not material, but since we were talking about spec houses before, I was just wondering.
No,
if
these people are buying it for their home, and we're trying to get through the process so that they could, they have a building permit before they close, and there's a time limit on that
Okay.
timing.
No more questions from the board? Throw it to the audience? Because we're going to keep this open, is that correct? Till we
That
hear
would be
from
my
the
recommendation.
from
I
the
mean, if for
Conservation
no other
Board?
reason, yeah, the steep slopes issue, I think you're going to want to hear from Ron on the wetlands buffer issue as far as the septic goes.
Okay.
So
Are there,
I'd be prepared to close it, I believe, at next month's meeting.
Yeah.
and move forward.
I just want to see if I understand, this is the second time we're doing this tonight. Just because we close a public hearing doesn't preclude Ron from opining on, or you or anyone else. So is there a reason why we're keeping, I'm just not sure I understand why we're keeping it open.
well, go ahead, no, go ahead. I was going to ask for comments from the audience first, and then we'll make the decision, if there are any comments. No? We can close it, and rather than granting approval, conditional on response from the Conservation Board.
Well, you can, and if that's the board's pleasure, you can always, especially if there's no comments on it, close
Yeah.
the public hearing. The reason you keep public hearing open is generally because there's some outstanding information which might
That's-
change the plan. If, for instance, here you decided that the septic tank couldn't go there, it might change the whole design of the structure as far as that goes. They may need to go and get some kind of variance in regard to the steep slopes. I mean, there's a lot of things that could change. They probably won't, but I mean, they could change.
Yeah.
And as a general proposition, what the board's done is when there's a major outstanding issue that could result in site changes, leave the public hearing open until those issues are resolved. But if you're confident that it's not going to change and nobody's, certainly within your purview to close it if you want, or as Andy says, to close it subject to written comments, hearing on this issue, whatever it might be. But your consultants can always give you additional information after the public hearing's closed, so. I mean, it's up to you. It's going to be another month any way you slice it, so I don't know that it makes that big a difference at the end of the day.
It used to be, was kept open because it triggered the requirement to make a decision within, I think it was 60, I think it probably still is 60 days, but because secret is still open, that stayed.
Well, yeah, that's true too, but it's also a big deal with subdivision approval where you can wind up with a default approval. There is no default approval for site plan, so if the time period goes by, it's just not an issue. But yeah, that's another reason to hold it open. If this was subdivision approval, we'd be having a different conversation, but
Okay,
site
board.
plan, it's up to the board.
Any comments on the board on this issue?
I'd be in favor of keeping it open.
Anyone else? Okay, motion to that effect to keep it open until next month?
I'll make that motion.
Second? I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay,
I'll say aye,
thank you. All right.
unanimity.
Moving right along. I'll read this one. You were struggling. It's a public hearing for Lowry residents, 80 Erie, is it Erie or Erie Road, Garrison? Erie? I think. The applicant seeking site plan approval to demolish an existing 5,000 square foot structure, replace with a 5,300 square foot, 3-bedroom home, 2-car detached garage, and 24 by 36 foot foundation also currently exists on the property. The property consists of approximately 68.7 acres situated in an RC district. The site includes frontage along Route 9, identified as the town's scenic protection overlay mapping. Property lies adjacent to regulated ridge lines showing on the scenic ridge lines overlay mapping. Involves a parcel identified in the town's open space overlay district mapping. Glenn?
Okay, I just, with regard to the public notice and that Mr. Lowry owns another adjacent parcel, which brings it up to something in the more like 90 acres, but we're dealing with a 68-acre piece. The property is located on the southwest side of Route 9, off of Erie Lane, roughly opposite what used to be Papa John's. I don't know what the name of it is now.
Garrison Pizza.
Garrison Pizza.
Need a man, yeah.
And there's an existing driveway that goes up and services, it goes past this piece of property and services 2 dwellings and services the dwelling that exists on the property as well. So we're dealing, thank you. Where's that little thing I clipped in my?
You want this one?
So the board has been to the site, and we're really dealing with an existing dwelling in this blank area with just the outline of the dwelling on it. So the plan is to demolish the existing house and replace it with a new building, roughly the same footprint. I think the footprint's slightly smaller, square foot's slightly larger. Rebuild one of the outbuildings, the garage, and I didn't show you the removals plan, but there's another foundation and stuff that's coming out. We're intending to utilize the existing septic system. Bedroom count is the same. An application has been made to the Putnam County Department of Health. So essentially, all of the real activity will be in the immediate area of the existing house. The house will be taken down and replaced. We have been to the Conservation Board. You referred it to the Conservation Board. You got a letter back. I think it's about as positive a letter as we ever get out of the Conservation Board. And they essentially said they had nothing, they weren't looking for any changes. I think what sold them on it, and we talked about this last month, or whenever we had a planning board meeting, was the effort that was made to mute the house in terms of its color, which I'll ask Ms. Rodriguez to come up in a couple of minutes, but also to create shadows over the glass so that we weren't so we weren't reflecting light out towards the public, and as I think I mentioned at the last meeting, and you probably saw, you can't see any public area in Philipstown. You can see across the river, but you can't see down to 9D. I was really surprised when I went up there, but that's clearly the case. I think the only thing that was really outstanding with regard to what you need here was the finishes and colors of the building, and I'd ask our architect to come up and tell you a little bit about that.
I think you all have copies of these, but. So there are 3 basic materials on the building. All the base material is fieldstone, locally quarried stone. Then the wood is eastern white cedar, and then the gray, it's a matte pre-weathered zinc. And then obviously the blue is the glass. And the point that Glenn just made about the setbacks of 8 feet and 12 feet for the glass as it faces the view. So I think, I don't know if do you want me to pass it around? Yeah. And just, I think important to us is that, I'm the architect, but also the owner, is that it actually blends into the landscape. So it's really hopefully quite invisible.
Anybody have questions while Ms. Rodriguez is up here? Okay, anything else, Glenn? Board members?
Questions if you have them.
That's nice. Questions, anyone? Initial comments, Ron?
No, I have nothing further from what's been offered for the sidewalk comments, which the board has in front of them.
Okay. Open it to public. Any comments from the audience? Mr. Lowry, Ms. Rodriguez? Entertain a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll make that motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Need to direct Ron to do a secret declaration and approval, resolution, Ron?
Yep.
We'll take one at a
Next
time.
meeting.
Yeah. Motion to ask Ron to produce a secret declaration?
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Let me rephrase that. A negative declaration?
I'll make that motion.
Second? Neil?
This now.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Direct Ron to produce a resolution of approval. Anyone?
I'll make that,
Second?
I'll second it.
Third? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Third, fourth. Get carried away. Damn. What's one out of three? I thought we were going to have three going today.
All right.
All right. Night, night.
This one's on page 2 of the agenda.
Say what?
New business.
Yeah, that's him right here.
Yes.
There's no public hearing, it's just new.
No.
New, yeah. We have new business, Gregory Rath, 28 Hudson Way. Applicant is seeking site plan approval for the partial demolition of the existing 7-bedroom residential structure, retaining existing chapel area. They're proposing to replace the demolished portion with an approximate 3,340 square foot, 4-bedroom, 1-story addition. With the addition, the existing driveway will be extended around the north side of the structure to the area of the detached garage. The property is located in RC zoning district and consists of approximately 8.6 acres. Yes. Make your case. State your name, please.
Gregory Rath.
You're the applicant.
I am.
Go ahead.
Well, we have renderings here if anyone would like to see them. You've seen the drawings. We are, I guess the most important thing is really we're decreasing the scale of the house from 6,900 square feet to approximately 1,000 square feet. Going from 7 bedrooms to a 4-bedroom house, and 5.5 bedrooms to 4 bathrooms, and 2 half bathrooms. So the significant scale is decreasing. The footprint is almost identical, even though we're going from a 2-story house to a 1-story house. This will enhance the line of sight which was a condition from Route 301. So it'll be a much lower house in design. We do not deviate significantly from the existing site conditions for the topography. or the footprint. Of course.
Excuse me, folks in the hallway, excuse me. We can hear everything you say there. So if you want to talk, you might want to go outside to do it because it works like a megaphone. Go ahead, sorry.
So, what we're proposing is a footprint which is very similar in scale to what's existing now. We're taking a two-story house and making it a one-story house. The footprint and the topography are very similar. We're expanding very slightly, but really keeping within what's existing there and modifying the shape around the perimeter of an existing structure. Would anyone like to see, can I pass around some renderings?
Yeah, now we've all,
Glenn, take care of it.
you too, Glenn. Does everybody have the original stuff that came with our packets? I mean, has there been any changes to this?
No, there's not been any changes since.
You
They
have?
made the submittal for the November meeting, obviously the November meeting was canceled,
Yeah.
so no new materials have come in since.
Okay.
There's 5 or 6 slides in there if you want to go from right to left in here, in this folder. So the existing house that's there was built in 1916, which is out of stone.
Is that the so-called chapel?
We're calling it the chapel. So that will remain, and what we're doing is we're truly making we're extending a shape around the perimeter of the existing stone house. Really in keeping with the condition of the property and topography. So we're here to answer any questions or.
If I may add one very important statement to make.
Go ahead.
Best party I've ever been to, bar none, in this town was held in what you call the chapel. And I actually was texting the previous owner, or at least the previous occupant. I sent a picture of you, sir, there as one of the two of you sitting there, just so she knew about it. So please make sure you keep the spirit at least alive, even though I never go inside. What's that? A party. It was the greatest party I've ever been to, so, or at least probably pretty close. I'm youngish.
Who was
So,
hosting that, if you don't mind me asking?
Michelle Howellbar was.
I've heard wonderful things
That
about
was
her.
amazing, amazing place. That thing was ridiculous. Impossible to heat, as Michelle just reminded me, so good luck with that situation, but,
I've emailed with her before,
good.
and
Yeah,
she's
an
very,
amazing
very
person,
nice.
and, I look forward to seeing it be put back into good use.
Thank you.
You didn't
Thank
take
you
any
very much.
pizzas up there from Garrison Pizza, did you?
So it's not a pizza party.
Anyone else?
I just don't understand the relocation of the garage. Can you explain that?
Sure. There was a garage there previously. So we got permission to build the garage, I guess, last summer. So we've already started on that. And it's very similar, Linda, I'll look to you for the proper terminology. It was approved. So we.
Building permit.
We had a proper building permit for the garage, thank you. So that,
Excuse me, we understand that the garage is being rebuilt under a permit directly with the building department. These plans now represent the proposed garage location that you filed, correct?
yes, they do.
All right, and the proposed garage is that now being placed in a location that complies with the side yard setback?
30 feet, yes, it does.
Okay.
30, we chose 31 feet to make sure we was any,
All right, he's showing the overall improvements.
Eh.
But it's not.
and in prior to 2014, there was a garage in that location that was knocked down by the bank. So we took the 30-foot setback and put it in that vicinity.
I get it. I was just confused by why you relocate the garage instead of rebuild it, but.
Okay, still.
Preliminary questions from the board? No? I guess this is a minor,
All right, the board has a technical review from my office. you know, just identifying the process as well as technical issues that the applicant has to resolve as he moves through the process. Procedurally, residential site plan projects are deemed minor projects by the board. You should so classify it at tonight's meeting. There's necessary referrals to Putnam County Planning because of its frontage on Route 301. Another procedural matter to determine is whether you wish to conduct a site inspection of the property prior to moving the application forward. And lastly, since it's a minor site plan application, a public hearing is discretionary, so that determination should likewise be made. With respect to technical issues, one significant issue is that is Route 301 is identified in the Scenic Protection Overlay District, and that's got a 250-foot setback requirement in terms of impacting that corridor. The site plan should be revised to identify where that 250-foot limitation is to understand any impacts to that view shed. And then obviously, eventually you'll have seeker to address. A short EAF has been filed with the application.
Okay. Anything else? Steve, any comment?
No, I think Ron touched on it. You declared a minor project, refer to county planning, and declare
Okay.
yourselves lead agency on
right.
uncoordinated review.
All the
of this
usual.
matter. Yeah,
The usual.
the usual.
Sure. Okay, motion to declare this a minor site plan.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Aye. Seeker declared unlisted action. Motion.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Referrals. We'll declare the planning board's lead agency.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, now a couple additional things. Referrals to Putnam County Planning and the was it North Highlands Fire.
Right.
So moved.
All in favor?
Second.
Second.
Need a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Site visit. Do you have a calendar? Thinking about it. And while we're thinking of that, do we want to do a public hearing, which we sort of is routine
Yes, I'll make the motion.
Second.
Have a public hearing.
for public, second for public hearing? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Now, we got site visit dates? We need to advertise, so we need,
This is today,
yeah.
and
Well, it's always on a Sunday.
the deadline, it'll probably have to be January.
Yeah, we're not going to do it on,
Yeah.
so the meeting in January is the 17th?
17th.
Yeah, so the 7th, January 7th?
No, the 6th.
7th is a Monday.
6th, sorry. Anyone? Fine with everybody?
Yep,
Motion to that effect?
I'll make that motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Anything else before we? Okay, we have a couple other issues before we adjourn. We're done for now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I brought this to Steve and Ron's attention because Sue Kenny in the town hall brought this to my attention. There's a whole number of monies that they're holding when people made applications that have not been given back yet. I'm not quite sure how to deal with this. She gave me the first one, which is over 10 years old, money sitting there from Vamco. How should we address this? I mean, to get these monies back. She wants to clear up her files.
Yeah, for the most part, I believe they're just escrow monies posted.
Right.
Some
of it's quite
applications have either
significant.
been prosecuted, approved, or they've been abandoned. but money still remained, the applicant's never requested it back. It's becoming a burden to continue to show that on the town record, so.
Right.
The question is how to move that forward and formally release those monies as appropriate.
Have efforts been made to reach the owners of said monies, or?
It's a town clerk and town controller and town board issue, really. The way it's set up now is that the escrow money is deposited so that they can pay the bills that come due, and of course the fees that are due as well. And once an application is done, the applicant is supposed to go back to the town, the clerk actually is where the application is made, and says, please return my, just send a letter. I'll even get by with an email. Return to me the rest of my escrow. And when that happens, the application comes into this board, and you say, is there anything left of outstanding bills? And assuming that there aren't, then you approve the release. But you don't on your own go out and say, let's hand this escrow back. At least not the way it's set up right now, you don't. You don't do accountings like that. Now, if Sue Kenny or somebody says, I have all these old files and I would like to clear them out, appropriate thing is to send a letter over to this board, and then you can take a look at them, and then you send a letter back to the town board saying these appear to be done, and then the town board can release them. That kind of looks like what's happening here. So put them
Should
on
we,
for next month.
Should I talk to her and say, give us a list of all the ones that you've got that are,
If you want to do it as a self-help thing, I mean, really, it's up to the town board how they do these things, of course, but probably best would be to have a resolution or something establishing a policy that every 3 years, I don't know, pick 5 years, whatever, a year and a half,
Okay.
the town, clean out the escrow accounts and ask that they be released and sent back to people as opposed to waiting for the applicant to ask for it. But that's a town board issue.
yeah, okay, then I'm not going to do anything about it now, but I'll talk to Sue and I'll talk to Rich Shea and
I mean,
see if we can.
it's merit, and you can go in and say, hey, has anybody owed any
No.
money? You can-
No. Kim?
Is escrow no longer needed? Like when, is there some final approval that goes through?
Well, the escrow, there's two types of escrow. We usually hold them all, I believe, in one account, if I'm not mistaken. One is for approvals, and all the fees get paid, and all of the consultant fees get paid out of that. The other is for actual construction, and they have inspections as they pour footings and, comply with
Yeah.
site plan, and that escrow has to be done as well. All you're concerned with is the approval escrow. And so when an application is finally approved as in conditional, we've had conditional ones for years, in a couple instances, many years. But still, once they get final approval, and there's no other outstanding bills, there's absolutely no reason they shouldn't get their escrow back.
So is there some way that we could send them a letter saying this is your when they get their final approval, that let them know that they're eligible to ask for it?
I suppose you could if you wanted to, but they should really know it's their money.
They're the ones, yeah, it's their money, right.
They may not, people often have no idea what the process is, right? And they paid it so long ago.
I didn't know.
Right, there you go.
You want some money back?
How'd you get on the board?
I just
Yeah.
think, couldn't it be part of like that, if there's a final approval letter or whatever, at the bottom it'd say, now you're eligible to ask for your escrow back?
No, the end product of this board is an approval resolution.
Right.
I mean, we could
You know how those are phrased.
put something in the application, I suppose, if you had.
Well, all right.
Again, the town board would have to approve
To
that.
let them know so that they don't have to go, because it would make them happier and more positively predisposed toward us if
Well, it would be
we,
better for the town, too. You aren't holding stale escrow
Exactly,
accounts,
right.
but I don't know.
I don't know how much the
Easy
town
way
is
to
holding
get
right now, but the indication I got from her is significant. So I'll talk to her again and
Yeah,
talk to
have
the
her
town
send
board.
over a letter and say, I have these escrow
Yeah.
accounts, they've been held for more than whatever she thinks is appropriate. Please
Right.
review them and let me know if they can be released. And
Okay.
town can release them without actually being asked.
Okay, moving right along. The 800-pound gorilla, where do we stand?
Yeah. I wanted to speak to that before the meeting was adjourned, but obviously there's been a significant filing that's been presented in advance of this board meeting.
Let me just ask, has everybody on the board been able to open that file that was sent from the,
I tried to download it.
It's like,
so you got
no,
one?
it's like 400 pages. So I
Yeah, it's
just-
409 pages. Anybody else
Yeah,
had
it's a
trouble?
400-page document.
Just to clarify for the record, we're talking about Hudson Highland Reserve now,
Okay, yes.
not just the 800.
Yes, Hudson Highland Reserve, the board secretary sent out downloads, which amount to about 406 pages or so. Neil Zuckerman, you've not been able to open it?
I tried to download it
Anybody
twice, and
else?
it crashed
Peter,
my...
Dave?
I got it, yeah,
You got it? Could you open it?
yeah.
Okay.
Does anybody want a hard copy of the
I
document?
would like a hard copy.
Anybody that would, please let me know, and I'll make sure it gets delivered. Just two.
Well, Ron, let me ask you, I thought the intent was that you were going to review it prior to...
We're actually in
Well,
the
that's
middle
what
of
we're
the
going
review.
into now.
All the consultants, Steve's office, have the document. We got it electronically, and I believe in hard copy as well.
I think one hard copy.
Yeah, I opened the electronic version. So as I hear it, two individuals would like to see the hard copy.
Peter does.
The, three, okay. Let's discuss the process. Tonight is the meeting by which you formally acknowledge receipt of the document, because you only do that at board meetings. In the interim, as I said, the document was actually delivered to the planning board secretary on November 29. Shortly after that, she sent you those links to open it if you wished. So the town board, or the planning board as lead agency is responsible to first determine completeness of the document, which relates to the thoroughness of the document to respond to all topics that were identified in your scoping document. So that's the process that the consultants are doing right now. You could be doing at this point as well, and I'll make sure that anybody that wants a hard copy gets that shortly. The seeker regulations identify that the board must determine completeness, or that the document is complete, before it's permitted to be released for public comment. You send that out to other involved agencies, any interested agencies, and make it available to the general public. So that notice must be given once it's determined to be complete. The seeker regulations identify a guideline of 45 days to accomplish that review. It's not a fixed deadline, but it's understood that you want to...
When does that start, or has it started? So I thought.
Steve and I have discussed that. Obviously, the intent would be that you accomplish your review and come back to the January meeting with any comments you have, any questions, concerns, desires for clarification to the documents that you have for the January meeting. In the interim, by the end of next week, you'll already have received technical comments from your consultants and Steve. So you'll see them pretty quickly before the holiday, and you might use those to focus your review, but in any event, at the January meeting, January 17th, the hope would be that the board can come in with any comments you have to discuss completeness. You'll have already seen our determination or recommendations to you, and then that'll be discussed at the January meeting. If it's deemed to be incomplete, there'll be a directive to the chairman to release the comments back to the applicant for them to revise the document, which would then necessitate another review once that's refiled. So that's typically how this thing moves forward. So your only other desire tonight, I think, since we're going to have our comments done within the week, is you might wish to direct the chairman to release our comments to the applicant upon receipt, so they can get them early and start to move those things forward. Because very typically, there are going to be areas that we question or find lacking that may take them some time to review, and it'd be good for them to have them as early as they can. You'll have your own comments that you certainly are welcome. So those should be ready by January 17th. But the consultants are moving on a time frame of trying to have our comments done by a week from tomorrow, December 21. So they'll get filed with you, and shortly thereafter, upon your direction, to send it to the applicant.
And will those things, will that be like a separate document that just refers to the big one? Or will it be the whole thing with your comments on it?
Well, let's see, the comments from the consultants is going to be a standard memorandum format that you've seen from us before.
Right, okay.
So that could be Could be of any length, could be 5 pages, 10 pages. But it'll identify by chapter and verse
Yes.
the concerns that we have.
Okay.
It'll probably start with a determination as to whether we find it complete or not. And as I say, very typically, we're going to find some areas lacking. So we'll recommend that you find it incomplete, and then we'll identify the specific sections, areas, categories that we believe warrant either further research from the applicant or further definition, detail in the DEIS before you consider it complete.
And then if that is the case, if there's stuff lacking, it just goes back to them and they correct it and it comes back to us?
Yeah, they'll obviously move forward with responding to any comments we identify, as I say, within the week.
Yeah.
But they'll still await your comments before they formally make a new submittal.
So they're not going to take it dribs and drabs. They want
Right.
all comments coming to
Exactly.
them, and they can address them as one.
That's right.
So we
That's-
won't be, so if you release the comments to them, we're not going to come to the next meeting and have
With it.
them hand us something that we're supposed to read in 5 minutes.
No.
Okay.
They'll be anxious to hear from you because it's your formal determination in January as to whether it's complete or not.
Sure.
Neil?
Two questions. One, can you define completeness, please? And then secondly, can you give us some awareness of what the process is post-January?
Well, let me break it down just a little bit more. It's very rarely the case, well, let's take a step back beyond that even. You've approved a scope, and the scope is kind of like an outline, kind of like a table of contents, and it says this is an issue, that's an issue, and these are all things that need to be addressed in order to mitigate the potential adverse environmental impacts. The houses around the pond, the segregation of the woods, that type of thing. And now the applicants have put together this big book, this DEIS, and in order to review it for completeness, if I could oversimplify a little bit, you take the scope in one hand and the DEIS in the other, and you say, all right, we've identified stormwater runoff as an issue. And then you flip to their page. It's going to be there is an executive summary at the beginning. It'll tell you what's in what sections. And you take a look at the section on stormwater runoff, and it says here that they're going to mitigate it by, I don't know, doing whatever it is they're doing, putting in swales or, grading the land in a certain way. And they say that that's going to mitigate the stormwater runoff. Well, where's the proof of that? Oh, here in Table 4 is their engineering study regarding the proposed mitigating measures, or possibly saying that they don't need any mitigating measures. All right, what does that engineering study show? And then you flip to the appendix and you take a look at that. Now, if either one, you look at the scope and they don't address that issue, the DEIS is incomplete. Or two, they purport to address that issue, and you look in the appendix and smart guys like Mr. Gaynor here say, wait a minute, that doesn't prove what you think it does. There's other parameters to be considered, or your conclusion doesn't follow, or this test doesn't have sufficient backup information. Then you say, got to redo that test. Your DEIS is incomplete. Now, between now and pretty much the end of the year, we're shooting for next week are we shooting for? All right, he works faster than I do. You're going to have reports from AKRF and Ron, and I'll chime in to the extent that I can be helpful. And they're going to say, we've reviewed it, and look, there's a problem with this, there's a problem with this, there's a problem with this, okay? You may review it as well and say, well, I have questions about that, I'm not happy with that. It's not so much that you agree or disagree with what they're proposing as a mitigating measure, it's that they address the potential adverse impact and that they have factual backup supporting their position at least adequately. You may disagree with it at the end of the day, but hey, here's here's some facts that support their position such that if you were inclined to accept it, you would be rational in doing so.
That sounds like, if you don't mind me saying, that sounds like a further definition than what I would call complete. It sounds like it's not just complete, it is reasonable, I'm hearing you saying.
Well, it has to be rational. If you want to say reasonable and rational are the same thing, okay. I mean, it's got to make sense that this study supports that conclusion. That doesn't mean that you agree with that conclusion.
I understand, but it's not a cursory review of, okay, there's a section called X, and the question X, and there's a section called X, and it's weighs a pound, so therefore it's complete.
No, it's more than that.
Okay.
It's got to be
That's helpful.
backup information to support the positions they take. Now, in January, you'll have that report, and you'll have looked over to the extent you can look over such a thing. And there's two ways that it could go in January. That's why we're sharing ought to share anyway, it's up to you, the consultants' reports with them. One, you could adopt a resolution rejecting it, saying it's incomplete, which happens often, it's not. Or two, they could say, well, don't reject it yet, let us go back and do more work and resubmit. And it's, pretty much the same thing, except it looks a little bit more better optically if you don't actually vote to reject it. But it's your prerogative, you could certainly do that if you want to. And we'll see how they want to handle it in January once they have the comments. And what I would anticipate is going to happen is the comments will say they have to beef up this section and look at that section, and then they'll go back and they'll come back March or February, I don't know how, it depends on how quick they're going to work. And we'll do the whole thing over again until you're satisfied that all the items listed in the scope have been addressed and that the studies and data that's submitted with it support the positions that they're taking. Once you accept it, then you put it out for public comment. You hold a public hearing on it. And you can make comments, your consultants can make comments, members of the public can make comments, and all of those comments have to be addressed in a separate document that they put together called a final environmental impact statement, the FEIS. And that's where
Put it out there for the public. How long is that requirement?
60 days after.
60 days.
I think after the completion. The other thing you need to understand.
It's a minimum of 30 after you deem it complete, and you can close it no later, or close the public comment period no later than, or no sooner than 10 days after a public hearing if you have one.
Okay, so it's 30 and 10, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, typically
Okay.
it runs to 60 or 90 days.
But that's after you close it, you could hold it open from, But anyway, the other thing you need to understand is that those timelines, they're directive timelines. They're not mandatory timelines. So you exceed those timelines, there's no default approval or anything along those
Okay.
lines. So if you say, gee, we need more time, as long as you're reasonable about it, you're not going to have a problem.
Let me provide a little bit more detail, but understand that the DEIS doesn't have to answer every question to your satisfaction. Merely you have to identify whether it adequately addresses all the items in your scope that's sufficient for public comment. So the DEIS is clearly the applicant's document. It's his representation of his findings or opinion on anything that's identified in the scope. Once it's deemed complete, you then go through this public comment period. You refer it to outside agencies. And the end product of that, as Steve indicates, is going to be the applicant filing a final environmental impact statement. The final environmental impact statement clearly is going to be the board's document. You can't accept that as complete until you completely agree with the findings in that document. Because the outcome of that final environmental impact statement, once it's accepted, is you're obligated to write a finding statement, which your consultants will help you write, to make a final determination as to whether the project moves forward or not, whether they've adequately mitigated all potential adverse impacts. So this is an extended process, but the DEIS doesn't have to be perfect. It merely has to have sufficient information for the public and the other involved or interested agencies to respond. So just understand this.
Well, Ron, I agree with you, but the analysis and the data supporting the statements has to be adequate to support the statements that it purports to.
Right.
All right, just so when we say adequate for public comment, we're on the same page here. Okay.
So it doesn't have to be perfect? Is that basically?
Well, he's phrasing it that way, which is fine. The way I'm phrasing it is that it has to support their position. Lawyers have a phrase called prima facie, means on its face, okay, on the surface. So as long as the data would, if you were so inclined to accept it, reasonably, rationally supports the proposition they're submitting it for, it's adequate for public comment. You can look at it and say, I don't agree with that. I think it's just wrong, and that's fine. But if it rationally supports what it is they're saying, hey, here's a study that supports that there's not going to be adverse impacts from stormwater runoff, you can say, I disagree with the results of that study, but it's a study that, it meets the parameters of basic science for whatever it is that you're looking at it for, whether it's hydrology or air impacts or whatever it might be. If the study can stand on its own, even if you disagree with it, and even if you could find other scientists who would say, I completely disagree with it, that's good enough for the DEIS to go forward.
So it takes all the emotion out of it.
Well, it's rational, if you want to look at it that way. That's another way of phrasing it, sure.
I heard Dennis is going to get a hydrology degree between now and January 15th. Is that, are you, are you on the hydrology?
A Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Renaissance.
Renaissance.
Now, to move this into, as you were saying about the first thing you said, Ron, is to move this into going back to them, we can formally acknowledge receipt of this tonight.
That's right. I guess the outcome, as we've considered it and in discussing it amongst the consultants, is we would suggest that a document, an email be issued, from the chair to the applicant, just to advise the actions taken at tonight, that you formally acknowledge receipt of the document at this meeting, just to set timeframes. And to advise the applicant that you consider determining completeness at your January meeting, and then just reminding all parties what the timeframes are. We'd also like to formally have a acknowledgement from the board tonight that we'd be permitted to release our comments to the applicant upon their filing with this board, which, as I said, should occur by the end of next week.
Now, that sounds like a couple of different motions. Or can we incorporate that in one motion?
It's your prerogative. I mean,
You got all that written
guidance
down?
is good.
Okay, somebody moved, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, anything else, Ron, on this?
I think that covers it for now. I know.
Should we start sharpening our pencils?
Yeah, and I'll assist in getting that notice out to the applicant tomorrow through the chairman.
Thank you. Anything else before we move along? Motion to adjourn? No, nobody? Seconds? All in favor? Aye, thank you.